how you managed to get involved in yoga and to become a yogini. Do you know when and how yoga came into existence and for what reason?
We learn practices of how to come into closer contact with this consciousness and how to begin to function from that level. Because yoga tells us that these five senses, these five that we all rely on, are actually constantly asking for our attention. Manipura, here at the solar plexus, Anahata, the heart, Vishuddha, the voice, Agnya, the third eye, and Sahasrara, the crown, okay? I discovered Yoga Nidra, okay? I started guiding myself through meditations to put myself to sleep where I would feel the energy in different parts of my body. And it's vastly, vitally important, right? Without my teacher, I can't imagine how much longer it would have taken me to know this.
If you are new to this podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. If you would like to support this podcast, please check out our merch store on Amazon with the brand Todd and Me. We've got some cool t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, and sweaters. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And if you're now starting a spiritual journey, you would like to start a spiritual journey, or you're currently on a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, please hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246 and it will help you to get some magic mushrooms. Enjoy the show and stay tuned because we have some more great content coming soon. Hello, beautiful and amazing people. Welcome back to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. I am your host, Todd Cave. And today we've got a really interesting conversation for you. So most people that think about yoga only think about the getting the body moving part and doing handstands. But there's actually a spiritual aspect to yoga that most people don't know, including myself. And prior to me meeting the guest for today, Ashley Rogers, I had zero idea that there was a consciousness element to yoga. And I always thought that it was just, to bring some inner peace, to bring meditation. But I didn't understand that there were more levels to it, where basically most of the things that I talk about on this channel actually breaks down from a yoga perspective and shows me that in reality, there's much alignment to these aspects. Because like she said, when yoga moved from east to west, a lot of the spiritual aspects were lost to make it palatable for the Westerners, but she brings back the old knowledge and brings us back to a point where it is the root of yoga, where it is accompanied by all of the things like stretching, handstands, and all that kind of stuff to it. And obviously, we did talk about that element of yoga as well, because you can't talk about yoga without talking about the poses, the handstands, and getting flexibility and stuff.
When truth is blurred by lies and misinformation, perception becomes reality. What will you perceive your reality to be?
Liberate your fears and walk with me.
Sit down and meditate. Connect with your soul.
Be a monster, and then learn how to control it.
You gotta be willing to do the work.
So it really goes really deep in terms of words and etymology and what they mean. So this is why it is really hard to really crack the matrix, because there's so many levels and layers to it, Ashley, welcome to the Conscious Man 7. I'm happy to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Todd. I am super excited to be with you. And really, you're in luck, because even though, yes, we met and kind of delved into first the physical aspects of yoga, yoga is a practice of consciousness. So we are going to be right on topic for the Conscious Man 7. And I'm great. Like I said, just happy to be here with you. Happy to be sharing about yoga.
Awesome. So can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, how you managed to get involved in yoga and to become a yogini?
Yeah, so That is a lifelong process, right? And I've been at it now for about 13 years. And my story in terms of yoga was really interesting because everyone always assumed that I was like a very physically active person into basketball or ballet or something, mainly because of my height. And in reality, I never was. I had never done anything physical in my body until I happened to arrive into a yoga class. And after the very first Shavasana, the first class, I immediately asked this woman, I was like, how can I learn more about yoga? And she said, I do a 200-hour yoga teacher training. And that's something you can find pretty much anywhere. But I signed up for it immediately because I thought I've got to know what this is. I've got to know more about this. And so from there, I had a couple of children. I had two little boys. They're 10 and 8 years old now, and they've been on my mat since since before they were on this side. And so after that, I found the practice of Ashtanga, and that really was what led me to the more philosophical and consciousness aspects of yoga. And from there, I found Kundalini, which, helped me dive even deeper. So I've had this kind of broad range of different styles of yoga, but my primary lineage is through Ashtanga, through my teacher, Andrew Epler, and our mutual teacher then, his original teacher, who is Guruji BNS Iyengar. And he is a really special teacher because he comes from the lineage of yoga from Mysore, India, which is from Krishnamacharya. So Krishnamacharya was the yoga teacher to the king of Mysore. And there were 4 of his students who kind of brought yoga, Ashtanga yoga, over to the Western world. And they are Patabi Joyce, whose style of Ashtanga is wildly popular and super well known. And then B.K.S. Iyengar, who is not related to my teacher, just super common last name in India. And Indra Devi, who was the first woman actually to train with Krishnamacharya and then to come and share yoga in the Western world. And then my teacher, BNS Iyengar. And like I said, he just turned 98 years old, and he is still to this day teaching yoga asana and philosophy. And so it's been with him and the scholars of the Samskriti Foundation, which is also there in Mysore. They are preserving and studying and sharing the ancient texts on yoga. I got to go actually and visit and see them working on the palm leaves, the translations. And so, yeah, that's where my background of yoga comes from. And it's to those people and places that I have this infinite gratitude for bringing this practice into my life.
Awesome. That's such a great story. So can you tell us, because I was trying to look for it myself, do you know when and how yoga came into existence and for what reason?
So that's a big question, Todd. I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. Yoga, so there's a text called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which shows kind of what were the very first postures of yoga to be kind of like recorded and taught, right? So we're talking about yoga asana in this way. And the Pradipika is kind of the foundation for like all that we know of yoga asana. And many of the yoga postures are, even their names reference like animals or things in the natural world, because this was a practice of observation of the natural world and then repetition of what we find there, right? Recognizing that there's some innate knowledge, some innate way to observe in the natural world what will make us also feel good and feel vital and feel whole and feel connected, right? So yoga was originally this practice of observing this and repeating it in ourselves. And in that way, observing the effects that these postures would have on a human being and human consciousness. And so that's kind of the root of where all of the asana comes from. And that's, thousands of years old. And then the Vedas and the Upanishads are as well these very ancient texts, like thousands of years old, that outline more of the consciousness aspects that you were talking about and teach us really how the soul, how and why the soul comes into incarnation, and what we're doing here, and how we can understand ourselves and come into contact with this this infinite consciousness that we already are, right? So we're matter animated by spirit, and that's what yoga is teaching us as well. So these are the foundations of yoga philosophy. And then asana is within the last, couple of 100 years, and particularly the asana that we know in the West is a much more recent phenomenon, right? So that's kind of a bit of a timeline without getting too complicated here in the beginning.
No, that's fine, because the thing is that a lot of the times when people hear yoga, and I certainly put my hand in the air and say that this was me, I always thought that yoga was just about being in a lotus position or stretching. But after I met you, and then you started to teach me some of the other aspects of it, because on the Conscious Man 7, we talk about consciousness and spirituality. And I was very intrigued to understand that there is a spiritual aspect of it. So let's dive into that a little bit. So can you share some of the spiritual teachings or aspects to yoga? Because I am almost sure that most people are like me, and they have zero clue that there is a spiritual side to it. Honestly, I didn't know at all.
No, well, absolutely. And it's a super common thing. And thank you for asking me this question and giving me the opportunity to share it here with your listeners, because like I was talking about, in this movement of yoga from east to west, right? A lot of the spirituality and consciousness practices of it were kind of removed. And that's kind of unfortunate, but it's also a truth, because I, for example, in what I teach and share, like obviously I share yoga asana, but when I teach yoga philosophy, when I share it in my mentorship or with my students, I base it directly from the sacred texts that we have available to us, right? So if you want to know about consciousness in yoga, the places to start are the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Bhagavad Gita itself, which in the end, the Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu text, okay? But it outlines for us all of the understanding, like I said, of what we are, why we're here, and what to do with it, right? And so yoga acknowledges concepts like reincarnation, for example, because in yoga, we are taught that the soul has, like I said, matter animated by spirit, right? The soul has come into this body for a very specific reason, that the soul, in fact, is called the Atman in yoga philosophy. And the Atman is this element that's animating us here. And it's chosen this body, we as our higher selves have chosen this body. We chose to come onto this earth with the parents that we have, in the family that we're in the place and the time and everything, very specifically to learn specific lessons for our evolution, because the evolution of our soul, okay? So we're talking about on a soul level here. And Guruji, for example, says that yoga, specifically Ashtanga yoga, is soul education. And that's because we can look again at those primary texts that I talked about. And the Yoga Sutras contain something called the 8 limbs of yoga, which is something that I teach. And the 8 limbs of yoga include asana, right? That's why everybody knows about asana, because that's the one that got super popular and that everybody wants to go do. But asana is not even the first, okay? So the first limb of yoga is what's called yama. And these are 5 observances that teach us what to do with the world around us. And I'm just going to give a very brief overview. The second limb are the niyamas, which teach us what to do with this inner world, right? The third limb, finally, is asana. And this is where we gain physical mastery of the body, where we transform the body, okay? And that's not to say that there's a specific body of a yogi, but just that the dedicated practice of asana will result in changes in the body, okay? So, and the function of why we want to do asana, so these kind of build on one another like a staircase. So we had the what to do with the world around us, what to do with the world within us, how to gain some mastery over this body. And the function of that is so that we can progress to the next step, being pranayama, okay? So I had to review those quickly. Being pranayama. Pranayama is now control of the breath. So prana is the vital force, the vital essence of the being. It's this animating, it's the most tangible aspect of this animating divine consciousness that we are, right? The prana is directly connected to that, and that is the breath. So when we learn practices of breath control as we progress in yoga, we learn practices of how to come into closer contact with this consciousness and how to begin to function from that level. Okay, after pranayama, we learn pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of these senses, because yoga tells us that these five senses, these five that we all rely on, are actually constantly asking for our attention. You know, I want to see this, hear this, eat this, feel this, smell this, taste this, right? And so they're distracting us to such a degree that the more subtle senses that we have, right, that everyone innately has, are usually kind of shut down. And we can help to reawaken them through yoga by these practices of pratyahara, this closing down of the senses and focusing internally. And after pratyahara comes dharana, which is the ability to concentrate, which doesn't sound actually so difficult, right, until you think about it. How frequently do you find yourself able to sit down with whatever task it is and stay fully concentrated, right? That is something that the practice of yoga helps us to cultivate, because it needs our attention. Just like our muscles need to be worked to be developed, so does this capacity to concentrate. And we find ourselves in it organically when we're in like a flow state, right? So after dharana comes dhyana, which is meditation. And in meditation, we've acquired single-pointed focus. So we've honed our concentration skills so greatly at this point that we can now focus the mind on a single thing. And what we're focusing the mind on in dhyana, in meditation, is this infinite consciousness. And this knowing that this infinite consciousness, this Atman, this higher self, really is what we are. Okay? And then the final step, the eighth limb of yoga, is samadhi, which is bliss or union. And this is when that single-pointed focus is now no longer required. You simply are. You have attained to the state of being this consciousness that you actually already always are. And so it's that, a way of removing the layers of what we call the Maya, the illusion.
So is that akin to basically becoming the God man, the last part where you, I guess you can say, you become like the Christ, you become like the Krishna, you become that being that you're able to maintain this state of awareness, but constantly. Is that akin to that?
Yes, because what yoga is teaching us is that you already are it. There is no difference between you at a consciousness level, right? There's no difference between any of us, because we are all one infinite divine consciousness then, expressing itself in all of its infinite possibilities of manifestation to observe itself and learn, right? At least on this human level, we're definitely here still learning, right? But as we progress through these teachings, and not just the teachings of yoga, these are available in many places, right? And yoga is actually all-inclusive, right? When we say that yoga is for everybody, it's really, really real, because that's one of the reasons that, for example, kind of this practice got sort of washed down in the West, because here there's a different religious and cultural background, and people get a little bit uncomfortable when you start talking about concepts like God in yoga, okay? But obviously that's actually the foundation of the whole thing. So that's what's a little bit difficult about the way that yoga is presented and shared most frequently here in the West, and why I, really dedicate myself to sharing this kind of yoga. But it absolutely, you're spot on. It's the union. Yoga means to yoke, to unite. And what is it that we're uniting? This spark of this infinite consciousness within us with the whole of it, right?
I see.
God.
So basically, I guess this is akin to like when Christ said, you need to know thyself. So yoga basically has broken it down into these different steps in order to teach you each step in order to know thyself. Is that a fair assessment?
Precisely, right? This is soul education. And a lot of Christianity backs up exactly what yoga is teaching us as well. Be still and know that I am God. is a direct reference to meditation. When we sit with ourselves in stillness, we know God. We know God within us. We know God as us. We know God all around us. That's the state of dhyana, right? Of meditation and connection. It's giving me chills, actually. And then that is what leads us to samadhi, to union.
Okay. When I was like looking, preparing for this interview, I came across one type, and it was called the Kundalini yoga. Because the Kundalini, when I first heard about it, I was like the rising of the energy through, I guess, is it the vertebrae or basically the coil inside of you? So
Yes.
how then would that be? How is that a yoga practice? Is it that learning to bring that energy from the bottom chakras through to the higher chakras?
Yes, only it's not that you have to learn how to do it. It's already, like I said, all of this is innate within us. So the practice of Kundalini, like I said, is another that I've come into deep personal contact with and has been transformative, life-changing for me as well. Because you're right about the aspect of the coiled energy. So the Kundalini energy is considered a serpent, right? And it's said to be coiled at the base of the spine. And that as we begin to undertake the practices that allow it to awaken, right, then it does exactly what you said. And it does, the spinal column is the physical aspect of the energetic column channel, that's Sushumna Nadi. So Sushumna Nadi is the central energetic channel of the human being. And Kundalini can then rise through the chakras that are positioned on this nadi, right? This energy channel, okay? And what has to happen first is that you have to purify these centers, because most often they're a little bit out of alignment in each of us, right? So there are 7 main chakras or energetic centers, and that's Muladhara, okay, the root chakra. And that's where, right, Kundalini is coiled. And then it rises up through first Spadhisthana, which is the navel chakra here. And then Manipura here at the solar plexus, Anahata, the heart, Vishuddha, the voice, Agnya, the third eye, and Sahasrara, the crown. Okay, so the process of awakening Kundalini is to allow that energy to move up through each of those energy centers and ascend, so that, again, like in the concept of samadhi, it unifies with this infinite divine energy, which we are still always in contact with. But the practices of Kundalini yoga are specifically, they incorporate and engage not only asana, which are the physical postures, right? And they use them in a very different way than what we would recognize from like Hatha or Ashtanga. This is a very particular practice because it all deals actually with the spinal column as the physical aspect of this central energetic channel. And so Kundalini uses asana, but it also uses mudra, which are the seals, right? We can create energetic seals with the hands and with the body to direct energies, to shift energies, right? To work as healers for ourselves, right? And so mudra, and then drishti, which is the gaze. So there are specific eye positionings in all of these Kundalini kriyas, they're called. And so a kriya might include asana, mudra, drishti, pranayama, which is the control of the breath, as well as mantra, right? And mantra is really one of the most powerful practices of yoga overall, because in the end, we are vibration, right? And so the chanting of mantra allows us to experience the vibration of our being. And Yogi Bhajan, for example, who again sort of like popularized this practice in the West, he shares that if you're going to chant mantra, you should do it by yourself, right? That it's best if we can do it in sangha, in community. But if you're going to chant mantra alone, to listen for the infinite chorus of voices that always accompanies you, because the divine sound of Om is the origin of all things and therefore resonating and vibrating through all things at all times, right? And so Kundalini is an extremely profound practice, and it's a science, as is all of yoga. So really, like, these are philosophical sciences, these branches, these types of yoga.
Wow, that's really interesting, because You know, I recently went on a show, and it was a really good show, and people basically the fundamentalist Christians, they came after me saying that, you know, I am talking a lot of devil worship and this and the next and the third, and this is all blasphemy. And I find it ironic that no, I didn't know these things about yoga, and I have dabbled into the Asian concepts and stuff. But to hear you telling me that all of these things that I talk about are in the Asian traditions, the Vedic texts, and in yoga is what I call a confirmation, because this is another source that I did not know that basically says pretty much the same things that I say. Because what I say to people is that if you want to improve your level of consciousness, one, you have to get the body moving. And there's a branch of yoga that does that, because you said you will get physical change. So I tell people you have to start physical exercise. The next thing I said is that you need to start eating right. And then you have to start to improve your mindset. So there's a branch in the yoga talking about basically you're sitting still. So it's about the mindset, the mental aspect, right? And then you're saying that after all of that, now you get to is it Satna you said, where it was for the crown?
Samadhi.
Samadhi.
Samadhi is the union, and Sahasrara is the crown chakra. So not sure which one you were.
Right, I meant for the crown chakra, because that is what infinitely ultimately connects you, or you realize your connection, because like you said, you never lost the connection, you just realize it, right? And I tell people that because when you get the body moving, you work on the mind, so self-improvement, reading books, listening to podcasts, you know what I mean, studying, all these kind of things, you help with your mindset because you're bringing in new concepts into your life, right? And then as you progress doing exercise, you will start to bring in more energy, more light, more consciousness into your body. And then automatically you start to awake spiritually. And basically, everything you're saying is exactly what I say, but just in a slightly different way, which is why I say to people that this knowledge is not new knowledge. This is old knowledge that we are now rediscovering. And it's just that it's told in different languages. We have different tales. We have different masters and yogis and gurus that came and taught it. And somehow along the way, the message kind of got distorted or hidden or pushed aside. And it's fascinating that yoga teaches all of that, which is why I said I had to get to talk to you, because it just was like building on what I was saying. And, you know, I'm very, very keen to learn more. So there's something that I found out recently, and it talked about yoga and it talks about the mana. Can you explain what the mana is? And is the mana akin to the prana, or are they completely two different things?
So I'm going to try to answer this question to the best of my ability. I want to respond really quickly to a couple of things that you just said. There were moments that, you know, almost made me laugh a little bit, because you're talking about something that like I've realized so much in my life too, that like right now I heard you talking about svadhyaya, I heard you talking about saucha, I heard you talking about asana, I heard you talking about, you know, like these aspects of yoga that I have these names for, right? But like you said, they're everywhere. They're in everything. And that is actually what svadhyaya is specifically about. So I did want to touch on that one briefly, because it's the guidance in yoga that calls us to self-study, but specifically through the lens of sacred scripture. Okay. And the great news is, like I said about yoga, it's totally all inclusive and doesn't require you to choose a religion to follow or exclude you if you are a follower of a specific religion, because it recognizes this, that sacred scripture is all around us, right? And the illuminated word, we all can recognize the illuminated word, right? And wherever we find that from, it's correct to study it from that, right? So whatever text that you're finding it in, or someone else is finding it in, whether they're religious texts or what have you, when we encounter that thing that sparks us, that thing that drives us to this awakening, to this enlightening, right? That's the thing to follow, is to do exactly what you're doing. So I'm glad you're sharing that. And now your question about mana and prana. Honestly, I think I only know of mana from the Christian tradition, which was supposedly like something that a substance that helped people survive over, I think, the Jewish holiday, right? So I'm not sure if I actually even know precisely what you're talking about there, because prana, like I already said, is this vital essence, this vital energy. It's literally the breath, but it is, like I said, the representation of this infinite divine thing, the Atman, the soul, the consciousness that is animating us. So maybe you could clarify a little for me there.
Well, the reason why I asked is that when I was doing some research for, to prepare for this chat with you, I came across something called Imana, and I've heard it but from other people, and they were mentioning that in I think it's the Yoga Sutra, it talks about the life-giving force, which is the force all around us. So I was kind of like, but I always knew that as the prana. So I wanted to understand if the prana and the mana are the same thing, or if it's like a slight variation. But
I admit I would have to research that one. I would go to, or go and do an online search maybe of those texts that I mentioned, the sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, to find like a specific reference there, because I admit I would need to confirm.
Fair enough. So in that regard, explain the prana so that people can understand from a yoga point of view how come it's so important, and what people need to understand in order to basically bring more prana into their life, because it looks like if prana is kind of important,
It's vitally important, absolutely, right? Because what happens is the prana, like I said, the vital essence of our being, is most tangibly accessible to us through the breath, right? We experience it physically with these five senses, right, as the breath. And that's why pranayama, as a practice in yoga, most frequently we've come into contact with it through like, maybe you've gone to a yoga class and they've done some kind of like box breathing exercise, or maybe a few of your teachers even have known about Nadi Shodhana or some of the more advanced practices. But pranayama is a way to shift the energetic state of our being, right? Because prana, like any energy, can be depleted. And prana is depleted when too much energy is going out and not enough is coming back in, right? And not enough is coming back in doesn't mean necessarily just what we think of as fuel, like food or things like this, right? There's a prana sheath, pranamaya kosha, it's called. There are different sheaths or layers of the human body according to yoga. And so the pranamaya kosha is the energetic sheath of the body. And it needs to be cared for, just like the physical body needs to be cared for, right? And we care for it in pretty common ways, but most of us don't realize it, right? So we care for it through sleep, we care for it through food, and food specifically. Like this brings me to the topic of saucha, like you mentioned. So food is also prana if we are consuming what grows from the earth, and even animals are prana, right? But we can think about restoring our prana through food in this sense, like whatever is most natural, most direct from the earth, most least processed is going to contain the most prana. Okay. By the time that you buy something that's in a can or a box, this has no prana, essentially, right? It's dead. Its energy is depleted. Its vital energy is gone. It's so far from its source of something natural that contained a high amount of prana and an amount of prana that can help you restore your own, right? So the farther processed something is, or the more processed something is, the farther it is from a genuine energetic source from you. And it can, in fact, and is in fact, having the opposite effect of draining prana from you. Okay, so we need to consider how to care for the prana in this way, and how to understand where to get good sources of prana. Another amazing source of prana is the first and the last rays of the sun. Okay, so Surya Namaskar, for example, within Yoga Asana, to tie it back into the physical as well, is a prayer to the sun. Surya is the sun, and Namaskar is to greet. but this is a prayer to the sun, a daily prayer to the first rays of light of the rising sun, right? And we know that the Egyptians also, and many cultures, are sun worshiping. And there's a reason for that, like our world today is very afraid of sunlight, it feels like. And I'm not here to make, medical suggestions to anyone, do what you will with your sunblock. But in terms of like prana, okay, going out into the sun with a layer of chemicals that's preventing you from receiving the rays of the sun is not improving your pranic energy, right? Going out into the sun, and we know that it needs to be at certain times of day, right? And we don't want to go out under like the direct blazing sun and stay out for hours. Our skin burns, or we have, dehydration. So we understand that kind of innately as well. But the receiving of sunlight is a prana fountain, right? And it helps us to restore that vitality and radiance within us. So I think that maybe answers a little bit of what you're asking, right?
Yeah, it does. And like I said, I did not know that you would consider food to be prana and sleep to be prana, because me, like, because I read a lot of stuff but I'm not able to go into super, super depth into every single thing that I find. And this is why I like to talk to people that have more knowledge than me in certain areas. And I always used to understand it as the life source energy. So for me, my understanding was like, it's just the energy that is all around us that we tap in that helps us to illuminate. But that is, I guess you're saying that that's one aspect of it, but then the other aspects are actually how you feed yourself, going into the sunlight, sleep, which makes so much sense, because now thinking about it here, I realize that when I don't sleep enough hours, I am a bit moody, I feel lethargic, I'm tired, and I guess, I'm not really myself. And then if I don't eat right, or I eat processed food, I also don't feel right. So now hearing your explanation makes a lot of sense, because this is why I always tell people that you have to try to eat organic food or as naturally produced food as possible, which would mean that it has less processed.
Least processed, like most direct from the earth that it can be, because the more direct it is, the more vital prana it still contains.
Right. So this is interesting, where I have actually been talking about prana without even knowing it, because I always tell people exactly that. You have to look at your food sources. You have to eat organic food or more naturally produced food. You have to get your 7 to 9 hours of sleep a day, and, going into the sun. Basically, I'm talking yoga without even knowing it, right?
Yes, because this concept that you're talking about is referred to in yoga as saucha. Saucha is cleanliness, okay? And it doesn't just mean like, we think of cleanliness like keeping our spaces clean, right? And this level of cleanliness, like the environment that we're in, this is very important, because we know what it feels like to walk into our house and we have our dirty clothes thrown everywhere and there are dishes in the sink, and and this walking into this environment is immediately like stressful and it's a bummer, right? But if we walk into our space and we've kept it well and we've cleaned up after ourselves, and we walk in with this much more like, okay, I'm home, right? And so we can think of saucha on this level, kind of, or rather in this perspective, across the levels, because again, we're not talking about just the physical. None of yoga is geared toward only the physical. It's also geared toward the energetic, right? And so the energetic saucha is this topic, right? It's how much, and yoga actually teaches, I'll be honest, that as we progress through these practices, including the physical practices, the final chapter of the sutras refers to the yoga cities, which are the yogic powers, right? And it's said that we actually need much less sleep and food than we think that we do. And so that's something to consider as well, because there's an overconsumption aspect, right? Where we end up in the lethargic, what we refer to in yoga as the tamasic, or the kapha in Ayurveda, right? Tamas is this low, slow energy, and kapha is the earth and water, very grounded, very still, very steady, and so, but we can see how overdoing anything results in imbalance. And that's what Saucha is teaching us to keep everything in balance. And so it's not just even what we eat, how much sleep we get. It's also what we're consuming in every way, right? What we're consuming when we're reading, if that's social media, if that's, newspapers, when we're watching, maybe we watch the news, we're thinking about, what we're consuming there, being presented with this idea that all of the worst things are constantly happening. That's getting into our mindset. Like you mentioned mindset as well, right? And yoga is in the end about control of the mind. That's the control of the mind is what gives us the capacity to clear all of those things out, to get focused on the consciousness and the more elevated topics and themes of life, right? Not just of conversation. But like this, like Saucha is a whole job of keeping your energetic being clean in every way, or as clean as you can, to be what? To be the best physical container, the best vessel for this infinite conscious infinite energy, right? That is this consciousness animating us.
Yeah, it is very fascinating, which is why I found like just yoga when I first got introduced to it by you, quite interesting, because I always used to just think, oh yeah, that's just for girls, like, you know what I mean? Like, what a man has got to be doing yoga. But as then I started to learn all these things that you were talking about, and then how it balances with in terms of the movement of the body, which obviously as a guy that does exercise, I realized that it brings a good balance to you. And before I forget, there's something that I wanted to ask you, because you talked about the mudras, right? And I do this when I'm meditating without knowing why. But you said that basically it is to encapsulate and to seal the energy or something like that, from memory?
They are energetic seals. Mudra literally means energetic seal or seal. Okay. But so when we connect the fingers of the hands in different ways, for example, we are connecting energetic channels. It's like a light switch, like a circuit, right? You're completing a circuit. Same thing, by the way, when you go out and put your feet in contact with the earth, right? You're electromagnetic beings. And so we can work with these energies, these currents of energies. They're called nadis, channels of energy in yoga. And these hand postures then help us to complete different kinds of circuits, help us to direct different kinds of energy, right? And so that you're doing this intuitively, I really believe that your soul, like I said, in terms of yoga, your soul already knew this at some point. And that's why these practices come back to you naturally without having to be taught to you by someone. For example, in my own life, I had the experience of I was 12 years old maybe, and I discovered yoga nidra, okay? I started guiding myself through meditations to put myself to sleep, where I would feel the energy in different parts of my body, like starting with my feet. So I would focus my awareness and consciousness. I know this now. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing. I was, like I said, 12 years old maybe. And moving through my whole being, like a body scan kind of thing, right? And in the end, it turns out years and years later in all of this path of yoga, I discovered that what that is yoga nidra, which is psychic sleep, okay? It's putting our bodies into a state where we can be in a different state of consciousness, right? The brain waves at the literal level. It's changing our brain waves, right? And so that I think I might have gotten a little bit off topic of your original question, but...
No, that's fine. Because basically, like I said, I just do it. And like, I mean, I didn't know exactly why, but it just felt like if I had a bit more of a more powerful experience in meditation than without doing it, So
because your soul knows it, your soul knows this practice, and then it comes. We remember in some ways, like our physical cells remember all of these lifetimes that we've lived or these experiences that we've had, right? Because it's a vibration that we now carry within us. So that really was what I was trying to get at. Thanks for bringing me back. was the fact that a lot of things that happen in us physically in these lives or energetically is something that our soul already knew. So the mudra that you're using, by the way, is called Gyan Mudra to connect the index finger and the thumb. It's the wisdom seal. Yeah. And so it's actually, what's happening here is that this finger represents the ego and this finger represents God. So we cancel out the space between the ego and God, right? And in this way, we can kind of silence it and tap into this connection of union, right? And so the wisdom seal, Gyan Mudra.
Wow. Like I said, I had zero idea why. It just felt great. So I just kept doing it. Truthfully.
Mantras, for example, that have you moving through each of these connections, right? Called Kirtan Kriya, the one that I'm thinking of. And it's incredible that not only does it function on an energetic level, but this Kriya, this Kirtan Kriya, where you chant sa, ta, na, ma, moving through these connections of the fingers. So sa, ta, na, ma. And you do this for a period of 12 minutes and you begin singing it and then you lower it to a whisper and then you do it in silence, but you continue the movement of the fingers, okay?
Wow.
And then you return to whispering it and you return to singing it. And this Kriya, okay, has been shown to help Alzheimer's patients, for example, recreate or create new neurological pathways. Because we know that Alzheimer's is like, it's affecting the brain, right? And the neurological pathways and the ability for information to be transmitted as it was previously, right? To whatever this disconnect is that's happening in the brain. So this Kriya can help people with, with depression, with anxiety, with stress, with sleeplessness, with whatever, right? Like sitting down and doing this work, these energetic seals, combined with the mantra, right? Combined with the vibration, combined with the silence and the stillness, creates changes in our beings. It can create changes certainly at the cellular level, and I believe even at like the DNA level, okay, that we can really activate and shift every aspect of our being through these practices. And like you said, they're not new. We are collectively remembering them, and I'm incredibly grateful that we are. By the way.
Yeah, it really does seem like we're on the precipice of massive self-awakening, because I see it in my podcast, because I've been doing podcasts now, this is now going 2.5 years, going 3 years. And when I first started, yes, there were some people that were interested in these things, but it appears like 2024 is where it just went on steroids, where like it's almost like collectively everyone, I can't say everyone, but a lot of people are starting to like ask themselves the questions like, who am I, what am I, and where did I come from? And what I am seeing is that a lot of people are just not getting the answers, and is like something is causing them to search, and people are finding podcasts like mine and other shows that I've been on that have shared similar information, because there's this innate knowing that, what we've been told and how we're living just isn't right, because we're told to go to school and get a nice, secure job. We're told to work 40 hours a week, for 40 years of our life and retire on 40% of our salary. That model doesn't work. It doesn't actually give us happiness. It doesn't give us fulfillment. Even if it gives us loads of money, there's still an emptiness on the inside. And we're not finding our true purpose. The thing, our vocation, the thing that brings us joy and happiness. And because of the pandemic, we're finding that people are starting to wake up and realize, hold on a minute, well, all the stuff that they told me is a lie. And I'm seeing it with the support now with my channel, which I'm very grateful to everyone to listening. And this is why we're working really hard to get good guests like Ashley to share knowledge like this, because these are concepts that we're not taught in school. We're not, we don't see in the movies. We don't see in the media. We're not seeing in documentaries. It's very much suppressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's a travesty because we are greater than we think we are, and the power of the universe is inside of us. So you had mentioned the Atman before, and so can you delve a little bit deeper into the Atman and why knowledge of the Atman helps in increasing one's consciousness and, you know, just basically becoming aware of a lot of the things that you're sharing today?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think it's really the key to understanding it all, right? Is like whatever you're going to call this thing. In yoga, we call it the Atman. I think, you know, we refer to it as the soul. And so this consciousness, this part of our being is not separate from this infinite divine consciousness, right? And thereby we are not separate from one another or from anything in existence, right? And when we can start to recognize that we are not this, right? So one important practice is the what are we not, right? As we look to answer these questions, is what am I not, right? So I am not this body. This body is a vehicle for me, okay? I am not this voice. This voice is a vibration of vocal cords contained in this body that is a vehicle for me, right? I am not this mind, certainly, like all of these wild thoughts running around. The monkey mind, we call it in yoga. I and you and we, all of us, are Atman, which is Brahma, which is God. Okay? And now, instead of thinking, okay, I'm God, right? Let's help our ego separate because there's the activation of the ego. Now I'm God, right? And it's real, but we have to discern because we are also not the ego. So when we can recognize ourselves as the Atman, as the consciousness, as the soul, then we're able to see past these lies, to see past this structure that there's something outside of us that's going to give us happiness, that we should trade our lives and our vital energy and our prana and this experience for that, which really in the end is a pretty paltry kind of return. So when we can recognize ourselves as the Atman, we can shift into the state of the observer. Okay. And this is one of the most beautiful teachings of yoga in that it delivers us from suffering if we choose to really pay attention to it, right? Because when we recognize ourselves as the Atman and we can come out of the body and the ego and the mind and the voice and the thoughts, and we can know ourselves as this thing, know ourselves as God. We can know ourselves as the observer of what is occurring to the being that is Todd in this body or the being that is Ashley, you know, in this body in this moment. Because as the observer, it's not happening to us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
What you observe is not occurring for you. You're watching it. You're not participating in it. You're not doing it. You're no longer the doer, right? So yoga helps us learn to stop being the doer and to start being the observer, the Atman. Okay. And again, like I said, this is where we get peace and bliss and connection and are able to then listen in to that call and live something much more authentic and fulfilling and vital and radiant in this life, in this body, which is not what we are.
Wow, that is so interesting because, again, I didn't even know that this was a yoga teaching, but one of the things that has helped me through my refinement process, and all of my followers know I call it the refinement process. Other people call it the dark night of the soul. Was coming on to the final, like hardest points where it became so unbearable. The only way for me to cope was to actually start to do that, to become the observer, so that the feelings that I was feeling, I had to detach from, because it became so stressful. So it was so much suffering that I was going through, which I was placing myself under. that I had to just like zoom out and just look at myself and say, okay, yes, I'm experiencing this thing, but I am not this thing. Okay, what do I do here? Okay, I'm just observing it. Yes, I'm feeling it, but this is not me. And I had to start telling myself that at some of the deepest and darkest moments, because there was no other way that I could deal with it, because it was just, the suffering was incredible. And now hearing you say that is kind of like, you know, this is why I'm so intrigued with yoga in general, because it's not a religion. It looks like it's just not like a way of being, which is basically what I try to teach, where, you know, I say all the time that we all are God. Everything is God. The plants are God, the trees are God, the animals are God, we are God. But what happened to me is, when on the recent podcast that I went on, the Christians misinterpreted that, and they said that Todd is saying that he is a God. But the thing is now is that I was very specific with my words, where I said, I am God. I'm speaking through my God self, saying that I am this infinite, innate intelligence that is inhabiting this body, that's connected with the all. And I'm just the vessel saying these words as a representation that of what is. I didn't say that I am I said I am. So the problem is that Christians and ultra religious people get triggered because they don't understand the concept of energy, frequency, and vibration. And I think what has helped me through my journey is understanding that, because you mentioned the Om. And when I was reading the Saint Germain series of books, Saint Germain said that he's the one that introduced, that had also mentioned the Om. I can't remember if he said he introduced it, or I think that the Om was introduced to us. But what happened is that we started to like just get so absorbed into the Om that we were just there still not doing anything. But he says he prefers to use the I am, which is more of a bit of an action, where he says, I am this. So you're becoming present to the innate, infinite intelligence in you, instead of just sitting there in the lotus position, just be like, which is still the same thing, but you kind of get like distracted to like just being a nothing. Does that make sense?
Okay. So first I'm going to respond to your experience with the Christians. I've had that experience too, right? Well, in that I was raised by a lot of really deeply conservative religious folks in the south of the United States, right? So there was Southern Baptist was the denomination of my family, okay? So you can imagine how that was received when I started studying yoga, because then I got a lot of, this is false deities, and this is, like you said, like opening yourself up to demonic energies. Who knows, right? And you know what? But the great thing is that yoga helped me understand something that really, that I think, helps us all and can help us in these moments where we encounter someone who's so deeply ensconced into a particular belief set that they find it threatening to hear something that, just doesn't, they don't have a scaffolding for that, right? So what's happening is that yoga teaches us that there are many paths and one destination, okay? So yoga does not distinguish between any of them, and it reminds us that everything is really, truly perfect, that every being, so every soul, every Atman that is inhabiting a body, every aspect of this infinite divine thing, is doing exactly what it's meant to be doing right now. In this sense of this whole, here's my kitty she's part of the whole too, part of the all, right? But that's it, that we can recognize that everyone is actually doing it perfectly. They are exactly where they need to be, doing exactly what they need to do, with exactly who they need to be doing it with, in exactly the right, moment and everything, right? And so that helped me really, process a lot of the because you get intense pushback from some people, right? When I don't even feel like I'm trying to, yoga certainly doesn't require us. Oh no, don't do that, love. And so yoga certainly doesn't require anything of anybody. Whereas many of these religions do require that, not only that you believe a certain way, but that you convince others that that's the only way. And yoga beautifully liberates us from that, because It says, if we encounter someone who doesn't know, okay, not only is it not our job to make them know, it is in fact our responsibility to leave them be in recognition of their perfection. Right?
That is
We're there.
pretty much what I do, because what I have realized is that through my journey, I call it like different stages. So when I first started to come into this understanding, the first stage is like wanted to shout from the rooftops, tell everybody, try to convince people and stuff. And then I quickly realized that only brought more aggravation, more stress, and it's just energy draining, right? And then you go into another stage where it's like, oh, you don't care about anybody. You become almost like black pilled, where, everything is doomed, not going to make a difference, and we're all going to die. You know what I mean? That's one of the stages that I went through, because I just started to see all the bad in people. And then as I started to, going through more in my journey, started to realize that I am actually like judging people. But then I realized that in me judging them, I was really judging myself. So then I had another realization that, okay, so basically where they are is a stage that I was at as well. So like you said, my job is not to force them or like to indoctrinate them or tell them, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I just started to realize it's better for me to leave people. So if I share one or two things and it's not really received well, I just finished with that. And it's similar to like what Christ said. Christ said, don't cast your pearls to swine. And that is really applicable to that. And then I came into another sense of awareness where it was like, okay, what I'm going to do then is that I am going to work on myself so much that, I'm going to change my world, my particular world, Todd's world. I'm going to change, where I become so focused on my internal journey, my internal struggle, which is when I was explaining about I had to start to quote, become like the observer, because it was just like, I know all of this stuff and it's like, it's just so heavy. It's just bogging me down. And it was like, what do I do, So then I started to like detach from it and realizing that I am not what I think I am, right? I'm just having this experience. And then bit by bit, I just started to realize, okay, well, in order for me to work on myself at another level, I just have to surrender and let go. And that was the final piece for me. Just let go and say, and this is one of the inspirations for my shirt. So all those rituals, truth isn't learned, truth is realized. So this is my shirt, right? And I was like, okay, I just let go. I just surrender. And I said, okay, what you want me to do, I'm going to do. I'm tired of suffering. I'm tired of fighting. What you want me to do? And the voice said, do podcasts. That was it. And I was like, okay, message received. And they started to do it because it became like such a burden on me, where I felt like I was just walking around with this like bag of luggage, this thing on my shoulder just weighing me down. And it was all the stages that I went through. And then it was like the last stage, which is like complete surrender and trusting that I'll be provided for, I'll be taken care of, I will meet the right people, the opportunities will come. Because there's something that I always used to say to myself all the time. Christ said, he says, if the Father can provide for the birds and the bees, why do you think that he won't provide for you? And I had to drill that in my head. And then ultimately, I just broke and I surrendered. And then life changed. And, that's the message that I try to help people with. And it sounds like that is pretty much what yoga teaches.
Exactly. So I think we're doing the same thing, Todd. We're just
It looks that way.
Through the lens of yoga, and you're teaching it through the lens of this like innate organic experience of awakening, right? Like that's what I'm hearing you describe is this innate organic experience of being called on a soul level to respond to this thing. you know, and it absolutely is everything that yoga teaches and shows us as well. So but I've always felt that since we very first met and started some training together. And I was really impressed to see the way in which you integrated the yoga in that way as well, even in the physical way. But I do want to say one thing about the Om, because you brought up the Om and you brought up another mantra. and no. It's just that I have it tattooed here. I think you can see, right? And I got this like very, very fresh into the yoga practice too, but I got it because of a part of the Yoga Sutras that explains that the Om is the vibration of that all, of that consciousness, right? It is the vibration of God. It is the vibration that brought all things into being. It is the vibration that is the beginning and the end. Even its own sound, the ah, the oo, the and the silence that follows is the encompassing of all potentials of sound, right? And many, many creation traditions also talk, Christianity and the Egyptians, they all talk about, they have this, in the beginning was the word, I think the Bible says, right? And in Egyptian mythology or cosmovision, right, there's also a story of the world being spoken into being and cross cultures and times. And so Om is that sound. It is that thing, right? If we can envision, I know we've moved past the Big Bang scientifically now or whatever, right? But whatever brought that into occurrence was this sound, right?
Yeah.
And so I asked in India, I asked my teachers at the Sanskriti Foundation, I said, if there's one mantra, because they sing them. The Bhagavad Gita actually means the song of God. Okay, that's what those words translate into English. And so they learn and study and sing these texts all the time. And when they teach you, they sing them to you, right? They repeat them to you. And I asked them, what is the most important mantra then that I should be chanting? Because I was trying to learn. I've always been fascinated by them. And I've picked out over the years, like several really rather longer ones, because there's something also incredibly powerful in that, in getting into that state, like you were talking about, the repetition of a sound. Japa mantra, that's what that is. When you sit with the mala, which is that, it looks something like a Catholic rosary, and it has 108 beads, including and then the guru bead. And so you repeat a mantra 108 times to shift into that frequency, right? That's what's really happening there. And when I asked him which was the most important one to know, the most important one to chant, he said, Om.
Wow, that's interesting because what you said is true, because in Christianity, it talks about in the beginning there was God, and then the word become God, and the word became flesh. So basically that is the speaking of man into existence, which, like you said, would be the Om. It would be the frequency to create, right? So it basically what has happened is that religion has a lot of these things to elevate your consciousness, but what has happened is a lot of mixture of dogma and doctrine has been injected in it, so that there is ultimately a middle man. There is something in the middle of you and your creator, which is why it's very difficult for religious people to understand, because I call it that all religion has injected a savior character, and this savior character stops you from doing the work on yourself, because Christians believe, well, Jesus will save me. So what that does now is that you don't have to do any work on yourself. Don't try to overcome your fears and traumas. Don't try to heal and clean your chakras. Don't do any of that. Just believe in Jesus and you'll be saved. And I try to tell them that what you're doing is that you're relegating your power to something, but that power is in you. It's just like the same complex of government. So people will believe, but the government is their friend and the government is there to help them. And as we saw from 4 years ago, the government is neither our friend nor is there to help us. They try to force us to inject ourselves with poison and to euthanize ourselves. And is the same thing, because we've been conditioned through religion to have a savior to save us, when we in fact we save ourselves. And this is very much in line with what yoga teaches. I just didn't know it was yoga, but this is what I teach, right? Because this is what I have experienced and what I have found, that you teach yourself by trying to improve yourself. And by you improving yourself, your entire world changes, and you have less dependence on religion, the state, and even money. Because ultimately, money is just a level, a means of exchange of energy. So if you're vibrating at a high level of energy, then obviously you end up having more money, because it's just an energy transfer, right? So, it's quite fascinating, all the things they're saying, because it very much ties into the things I'm saying, just from a different angle.
Right. And I admit I have a complete bias, right? I view everything through the lens of yoga, but it's kind of impossible not to, right? Because like what you were just touching on there is the guru, okay? And so guru became this concept, especially in the West. We now think of people as like the guru who has all of this following and these people, and kind of like you said, like is in this sort of like savior position, right? Like he's giving them whatever it is that, and so there is an actual breakdown of yoga entirely, right? Because, well, there are a couple of concepts around this. Like, for example, my teachers in India, these are actual Brahmin priests, right? And there are Shivites, and then there are Vaishnavis. So there are two kind of principal deities in Hinduism then, so Shiva and Vishnu, and my teachers are Vaishnavas. So Vishnu is their principal deity. And they wear this marking on their head that's this two white stripes that comes down through the bridge of the nose, and then a red center stripe. And I asked them what this represents. And the two white stripes are the feet of Vishnu. So they are kneeling at the feet of their deity, their god, right? And then the red stripe is Lakshmi, the goddess Lakshmi, who's the goddess of love and prosperity and abundance, right? But this little white mark is the most important mark in this entire symbol that they wear. And it's because this is the Guru Shishya, it represents the Guru Shishya Parampara. Okay, so this is the student-teacher relationship, because for them, the guru then is your direct connection to God. Okay, it's the person who brings you to this knowledge that connects you to God, your teacher, your guru. But I have another teacher who, over the course of these studies, a Kundalini teacher who explained it to me a little bit differently. And I think both perspectives are extremely valid, but I wanted to bring them up to you because of what you were talking about there, right? With who's here to save us. So guru, from the Kundalini perspective then, guru means darkness and ru means light. And guru is that which brings the darkness to the light. And of course then that is you. That is nobody outside of you. That is not me to my students. That is not you to your students. That is not, even the person that I, with my whole heart and sincerity and respect, refer to as Guruji, also cannot be my guru, right? Because that which brings me to God is myself, right? And so we are the ones who are doing this infinite job then. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to remember that there is a structure of sharing and learning. Like parampara in yoga is the direct handing down of the lineage of yoga from teacher to student. And it's vastly, vitally important, right? Without my teacher, I can't imagine how much longer it would have taken me to know this, right? So in that way, I do really have a deep love and respect for my teachers. And in that sense, as gurus who have helped me move from the darkness to the light. But in the end, I know it's really only me doing this work, right?
Absolutely.
Choosing their teachings and activate them in my life.
Yeah, what you said is true. There are many paths, but there's ultimately just one destination, and the path is narrow and few find it, So you had mentioned the ego earlier. So what are some of the things that yoga teaches how to, I guess, overcome the ego or master the ego? Because I really, from talking to people, some people have different views. Some people say you have to get rid of the ego. Some people say that you have to master it. Some people say that you basically have to stand on it so that it raises you higher. It's basically, so you basically are on top of it. What is yoga's view on, I guess, either mastering the ego or basically rising above it so that people can use?
Yeah. Yoga acknowledges the ego as something that is like an obstacle to overcome, I think more, because what happens is that the ego convinces us that all of this is real, right? When we know on the soul level, at the Atman level, at the consciousness level, we know that this is Maya, we know that this is illusion, but the ego is really deeply ensconced in this illusion, right? And it feels that there's a lot at stake, right? And it drives us to gain more and keep from others and to the opposites of the principles of yoga, because yoga in the end is rooted in ahimsa, is rooted in love. Okay, the teaching is that we are love and that we're returning to love through this practice ultimately, right? Because what else is this infinite divine consciousness if not that? And so the ego in yoga, we can talk about, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is accompanying Arjuna on a battlefield, okay? And he's accompanying Arjuna in this chariot, and Arjuna is having a crisis of his ego, okay? All of us are said to have a dharma, a purpose for which we're born into this world, right? And that we have to follow it. It's not actually optional. Right? It's not that everything is like all planned out and things have to occur in a certain, sequence or what have you. But there's no way for our soul to come into being for this purpose and not fulfill it. Okay? So Arjuna is having a crisis of ego in this moment because his dharma is as a warrior. It's specifically as an archer. He's an archer. And on this battlefield, he's seeing that he's in a position where on both sides of the battlefield are his family members and his loved ones and his friends, right? Or people that he knows and that the ego has an attachment to. Because on an ego level, we think these relationships also in some way define me, also in some way affect me, and I will experience suffering if I lose them, right? So when the ego feels this fear that some part of this reality is in danger in that way, right? We react against it. And Krishna is guiding Arjuna to understand that he cannot not do his dharma. He has no choice but to participate in this battle, and that he needs to shift into his capacity to do it from the observer place, right? Like, I'm condensing a great deal here. But that's really what's happening. And so it represents for us that this chariot, we can also think of this as, the metaphor of this chariot then is the mind, and Arjuna is the ego, right? And Krishna is the Atman. And the 5 white horses drawing this chariot are the senses, okay? And so we know that when we drop the reins and let the 5 white horses run, this becomes a pretty bumpy ride, right? And that's our ego being in charge. That's our ego running the show, saying, yes, absolutely go eat all that junk food. Yes, absolutely go watch all that, binge all that Netflix. Yes, absolutely like tap into the pleasures and whatever of this material world, this Maya. The ego is that, like, it's that thing that draws us to that. But the great news is that Arjuna completely fulfills his purpose in the end, right? So it's possible. We don't even have to defeat the ego or stand on top of it. We just have to integrate it. We have to recognize it for what it is, right? And to, yes, in a certain sense, to control it, right? To be aware enough of it from a point of consciousness that can separate us from it, that we no longer have to respond to it, to react to it. Let's be real, right? Because there's a big difference between reacting and responding. We know that. So that's really more what yoga is guiding us toward, is to the recognition of the ego. And that's also, like I said, when we connect the ego finger to this finger. And I've also heard the tradition that many people, when they pray the mala, for example, when they do the mala, the japa mala, they won't actually connect these two fingers, or they'll connect it down here, so that the ego is not on top of the God consciousness, right? To recognize that the ego is below the God consciousness, that the ego is part of the illusion, right? So it's not, like I said, it's not nearly such a violent thing that we have to, kill the ego or destroy the ego or burn the ego or release, or stand on top of the ego, what have you, right? It's more like recognize it for what it is and then stop choosing to suffer from it.
Okay, makes sense. I guess I like that as well, because recognition of it and then not reacting to it, because it's very similar to what Saint Germain teaches in his books, where he said that you're not going to stop things happening to you, but it's how you react to these things that will determine where you are. So, and how I see it now is that we spend a lot of time complaining about how things should be instead of how things are. And when you understand how things are, it allows you to be able to make changes and to, like, again, not feed the ego, because the ego is going to want to attach to the pain and the suffering and keep talking about the same things and going over and over and over. And all you're doing is creating a negative feedback loop, because Saint Germain talks about and teaches that your thoughts and feelings are the two greatest creative powers that you have. And mastery of your thoughts and feelings will help you to be able to master your ego, because the ego wants to have that thing, like you're saying, to go and eat that junk food, to go and binge on the Netflix, to go and not go and do exercise. That is the ego. So it's quite interesting that you explain it like that, because I'm starting to think now, because I used to think it's about conquering the ego. I'm starting to shift now in terms of acknowledging it's there, but not letting it control how I react to things, and just say, okay, you said that, that's what it is. And it's almost a bit like having stoicism, where you're not letting your feelings get involved, where you're like, okay, so again, looking at it from the observer point of view, this is the thing, and okay, I have a choice here. I can either choose to let it bring me down, or choose to, if it's a challenge, find a solution. Or if it doesn't help me, choose to ignore it, right? And just let it be, because, you have to choose where you put your focus and attention,
Well, and that's, within yoga, we call that aparigraha, right? The ability to let go of, non-attachment. Like you said the right word there, attachment. Because what happens is that attachment breeds suffering for us because of one really simple thing. And it's the idea that happiness is found somewhere outside of us. Whether that is in a material item that we can come to possess, a home or a car or a certain brand of clothing or jewelry or what have you, right? Or if it's in a relationship, once I have this relationship, I'm going to be happy. Or once I get this degree, or once I, achieve this promotion at work, or once I, whatever, right? And we think that then we're going to be happy, right? And that's the ego telling us that then I'm going to be satisfied, but it's not true even. The ego is going to find the next thing that it wants to chase after, okay? So aparigraha teaches us to release these attachments by recognizing the falsehood that happiness is located outside of us, and returning to the truth that happiness is what we are. And not happiness like just paste a smile on your face and everything is great, but happiness from that observer perspective. Happiness from that place of like, all of this is perfect, right? I absolutely have everything that I need in every way, shape, and form, right? And that's not to say that we need to live these lives of either like extreme extravagance or like extreme poverty, right? But knowing that wherever we are on that scale, we actually always have everything that we need, and releasing ourselves from this attachment to the idea that it's somewhere outside of us when it's already right here all the time in every instant. And accessible with the breath, by the way, right? The breathing, the pranayama, the contact. So stop looking outside of you for what's already in you and come back to this, is what all of yoga is telling us, right?
So it seems that yoga gives you a bunch of tools on how to deal with life and challenges, you know, which is, I think we've touched on a lot of tools here, you know, studying the breath, the prana, getting the body moving, you know, meditation. You know, we get a whole bunch of tools, and you said there are eight branches, right? 8 limbs, you call them?
There are 8 limbs of yoga, yeah, and contained within them is absolutely everything we've just talked about. Because it is, you know, from a very physical or scientific perspective, yoga gives us a balanced nervous system, okay? And from an energetic or spiritual perspective, yoga returns us to our consciousness.
Okay. So if someone wanted to study the spiritual and discipline practices of yoga, what advice would you give them in order to do these things? Do they have to go to India, or are there any, you know, what advice would you give someone that's hearing this and wants to get involved?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously India is the heart and the soul of it, right? But it took me a decade into my own yoga journey to be able to make it to India. And so it is really like a pilgrimage, right? And so lacking the ability to rush off to India to go and live in some ashram and learn all of this there, one thing they can do, of course, is study with me. That's what I dedicate myself to, is sharing this philosophy of yoga, this creating our own reality through the 8 limbs of yoga specifically. That's what I share. And so beyond that, of course, there's also yoga teacher trainings. But you've got to be really selective in these things, right? You've got to be really selective when you look at a yoga teacher training, because if you're interested in these aspects of yoga, like I can say one reason that I brought into being this mentorship that I do with the 8 limbs of yoga is because I was sharing yoga at the time at a yoga retreat, which is another thing you can do. You can go to a yoga retreat, right? So I was sharing yoga at this retreat, and I was giving a workshop on the 8 limbs of yoga, and I was asking the students every week. This place was having new students every week. And I would ask them every week, how many people is this, you know, the first time that you're hearing of something called the 8 limbs of yoga? And nearly every hand in the room went up nearly every time. And these were people who had been, people who had been studying yoga supposedly for years, right? Had been going to yoga classes, had been, right, you know, doing yoga for some of them, you know, for not so long, but many of them who felt that they really like, you know, had this as a practice. And so when I shared this with them, every single time there were people who would come up to me and just be like, "You've just changed my life. You've just blown my mind," right? Like, and like you really also said to me yourselves, like you thought yoga was a whole different thing. And then, you know, in our conversations, you came into contact with all of this. So I'm reticent to suggest to people that they just go out to any yoga studio or any teacher training, but with some good research, absolutely you can. And you want to just look for people who are sharing authentic yoga philosophy, right? So who are sharing the work from the sutras, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Vedas, from the Upanishads, from the traditional authentic sources, right? My teacher, Andrew Epler, is another amazing resource for Ashtanga yoga and for all of the things that I've talked about, right? And he has online, I think he's amassed a lot of like Ashtanga teachings that he shares, and you can join even like workshops with the scholars directly from India. So if you can't go to India, that's one way to do it, is to listen to scholars and teachings from there. So that's what you want to do. You want to look for the most authentic connection to this that you can find, and people who are sharing it from that place of recognition of yoga as a philosophy, as a science, as a way of living and being. That's what you want to do.
Okay, cool. And how long would it take to learn, these courses? And does it involve learning of any like Sanskrit or anything like that?
Well, okay. So my mentorship, for example, like in terms of time is 8 weeks. Well, it's really 10 weeks because we have an introductory week and a closing week, but you can't call it 10 weeks with the 8 limbs of yoga, right? So, for example, my program is a couple of months commitment, right? Because to move through just these 8 limbs, and really I feel that anything Whether you do a teacher training or a mentorship with someone, or yoga intensives or workshops or whatever, it's going to depend on that's the beautiful thing too, is that there's so much available that you could do. You could find a weekend workshop, and spend a couple of days immersing yourself in this, or you could dive into a full-on teacher training, which typically takes months, 8 months to 1 year if you do it in person. Then there are people who offer those online, but I'm going to admit that I'm pretty skeptical of those. But at any rate, it really depends on what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for the most actionable, immediate things that you can begin to put into play in your own life, that can be just going out and reading the book, reading the text, the Yoga Sutras, start there. And then it's going to be integrated over time in precisely the way that it is ready to be revealed to and integrated to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Sanskrit, for example, like you said, does that involve learning mantras or whatever? Again, that's really going to depend on the source that you seek out. Okay, I'm going to stay away from the word should. Traditional study of yoga must include it, right? It's not separate from it. The singing of the verses is a part of it, right? And so over time, you are going to begin to learn Sanskrit from the names of the postures, from the words that you learn in the mantras, right? And the beautiful thing about something like that is that Sanskrit is said to be the language of the soul. And so it doesn't matter that we don't understand these words or know what they mean. They arrive to us as a frequency, as a vibration, right? That's communicated directly to us on this soul level. And there's where the magic of it is, right? We receive it in that way. So it's a super individual journey. Like I said, I've been on it for 13 years.
Wow. Because I concur with what you said about the vibrationary aspect of Sanskrit, because when I first started to research things and I came across Sanskrit, they said that Sanskrit was probably one of the last languages of vibration that you can feel the actual energy in the words and in the language and how it's expressed, right? And it's a very old language, to be fair. It's probably 4,000 years old or something like that.
Yeah, I would be hard pressed to give an exact date, but it's definitely thousands of years.
Yeah, definitely thousands of years. So we can't talk about yoga without talking about the physical aspect. So, tell us, what are some of the benefits that one can get from the actual physical practice of, the actual physical poses and the things like the headstand, the handstand, all these kind of things. What are some of the benefits that people get from that side of it?
So the asana is extremely important. And it's like, you mentioned something earlier about thinking yoga was just for girls. And that's really funny, because that's a totally Western conceptualization that's happened, right? That it's all of these gals hanging out in yoga studios being yoginis now, right? But interestingly, for example, Ashtanga yoga was only taught to men. And because of the nature of yoga, in connection to Hinduism, for example, I don't think that people recognize that women didn't have the same access to those spaces, and still really don't have different roles. In the Indian cultural system, a Brahmin priest has to be born into a certain family, and then it's not even an option, right? He's born into this family, and this is what he does. He studies this and he dedicates his life to this, right? So Ashtanga yoga was originally taught to 14-year-old boys to quiet them down so that they could be taught meditation. So to physically exhaust their energy, okay? But the thing about asana is that it teaches us mastery and it refines us in that way, right? That it really teaches us it can teach us what our edges are. It can teach us what this body truly is capable of, right? Many of us walk around in this existence in a body that has very limited mobility, very limited access to its real potentials, right? So asana transforms us in that way. It puts us in contact with these real potentials of this human vehicle, this vessel. And also, when we talk about alignment in yoga, for example, we're talking about the alignment of the physical body, of course, But that's also aligning those energetic channels that we were talking about, the nadis, right? And causing like the systems of the body to function better, right? Twisting, for example, aids the digestive system. Okay. Forward folding calms the nervous system. Inversions also have huge benefits in the circulatory system. And so it's like these postures are not just beautiful things to do in the body. They are that as well. They make beautiful shapes and they have that kind of, that thing that calls out to us when we see it, we recognize it. But they're doing, again, work on so many levels. They're physically transforming us into what this vessel is capable of, and they're energetically curing us, right? Like realigning us energetically and helping to shift energies that get stuck or stale or stagnant, So the postures, the asana postures do that. They work on both levels as well.
Okay, and because I remember, because one of the things like, I found with yoga is that it's a bit like calisthenics in the sense that it really does connect the mind and the body together. And this is one of the reasons where when you introduced it to me, I took to it like so quickly because I was like, okay, this is like I don't know how it's not the softer version, but it is basically like calisthenics without the strength part, but it's moving the body through positions, which is pretty much what like calisthenics does. It's just that calisthenics is pure about strength, is about beauty and form as well. And because you're using your own body, it really, I find, can complement people like me that do it, that do calisthenics. So like, are there any, because like a lot of people, obviously, when they get into yoga, one of the things that they want to achieve a lot is the handstand. So what are some of the and I admit that like when you showed me certain things, I basically was thirsty to incorporate them to improve my line. So what are some of the little tips you can pass to people if they want to improve their handstand line and stuff? Because we can't talk about yoga without the handstand. It's probably the most signature movement in entire yoga, probably one of them.
Well, I mean, it certainly is. It's what we might refer to it as a peak pose, right? You might have heard a teacher throw around a word like that. But like you said, yoga is a mind-body function. Actually, I just posted about this. I posted a video of myself doing a 1 minute long handstand, actually. I can actually stand on my hands for a full minute. And I told people, I'm going to tell you the secret to my practice. And it's not what you think it is, right? Because it's not my shoulders, it's not my core. It is my ability to, in the beginning, it was my ability to overcome my fear. So it was my ability to control my mind. And that's what Sutra says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And that means yoga is the cessation of the mind stuff. Now, the first sutra says, now the exposition of yoga, right? So it's basically like, number one, here's yoga. Number two, here's what it is. It is the cessation of the mind stuff. And all of the rest of them are about what that means and how to do it. And handstand is certainly a part of that because you have to be able to stop that part of the mind, or at least to believe that you're stronger than it, right? Or to shift that pattern of thinking, because part of my handstand practice is talking to myself. You know what I mean? Like, just telling myself, you got this. Okay, we're going to go up like this. We're going to stay right there, And I was trained here since I moved to Mexico. So I first learned handstand and yoga, and then I trained with a circus performer, which was a really fascinating experience. But he would constantly in our practices tell me, listen, it's not about looking for balance, okay? It's only looking to go up, 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 up. So you're repeating literally in the mind, up, 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 right? So that's why, like, yes, this is a physical practice, but it is so dependent on the mental muscle work as well, right? Because that's what it is. Learning to stand on your hands is learning to quiet down all that chatter. Nothing else can happen in the mind. It's an instantaneous meditation. You have instantaneous dharana, right? Or dhyana even. Dharana, concentration for sure. Dhyana, single pointed focus, yes, right? I mean, you are only doing that while you are standing on your hands.
I concur 100% with the mental aspect, because I find that, like today, I did some handstands, and I was like, for some reason, the brain was on today, so I was able to actually like hold it better. And then there are other times where it's like I just struggle to maintain, and it's not to do with strength at the time. It's not to do with like me having the balance. It's just like my mind is just not there. It's just not there.
You're thinking.
It's mad because, like, you know, I don't see how many years it is now. It's been like three years, I think. Yeah, 3 years that I started to learn handstands, and my form has definitely improved since from a lot of the stuff that you've taught me. And where I'm at now is shoulder mobility. Because before I couldn't have my hands straight up to my ears like that, and I've been working on that, and I'm going to start back doing some more practices to improve the shoulder mobility. Because obviously, being very muscular, you can get some challenges with shoulder mobility, you know?
Yes. But do you remember what I told you about that?
Yeah, laying on the floor. And
yeah, well, okay, that's one of the exercises. But the Surya Namaskar will really help you with shoulder mobility.
Which one is that again? I forgot.
The sun salutations. I think you've definitely received this resource from me, but I will reshare it to you. Because really, like, that's the gig, is that yoga, the performance of the asana, the doing of the asana, builds upon itself too, right? Like, over time when I started, I couldn't do, downward facing dog was hard for me to hold when I started yoga, because it was a ton of shoulder strength and mobility that I didn't have. And most of us, like I said, are walking around in bodies that are not functioning at the greatest of their functional or their mobility capacities. And so the practice of asana really starts to correct and transform that. But in particular, the handstand is really also about building it from the ground up. And you've got this, you do this, right? But many people want to skip I don't want to call them drills, because in yoga it's not, but don't skip the practice. You know what I mean? Like, the doing of the practice leads you to the ability of the posture. And that's it. Like, there are definitely kind of like specific asanas, specific movements that you can do that will help. Like, I think with you, I had you learn the walking into the headstand, right? Because everybody wants to jump, everybody wants to flail. And it's like, why do we think we want to do that? Because if you kick or you jump or you flail, you are going to fall. You are going to tumble. And it's okay, right? Part of the process is learning how to fall. In fact, one of the first things that I tell people to do is to learn to fall, because it releases you from so much fear. So if you get up there and you think, I'm going to fall, then do it. Make sure you're on like a area, or like you have a mat or whatever, do it on the beach, or don't do it on a concrete surface. But like, let yourself fall. Let yourself conquer the fear, because now you know what happens if you fall. If the huge fear is what happens if I fall, let it happen. And then you see that nothing happens. You just go back and try again. Okay. But walk into the handstand, I do want to mention this specifically, is that what it teaches us is that it's about alignment, like you said. So if we try to walk into handstand, which is to say, just like elevate the hip or headstand. Sorry. So if you put the head down on the mat with the appropriate structure, the support from the arms, and then you elevate the hips first, and you start to walk those little feet in as much as you can. And the closer you walk, if you have enough flexibility, right, and enough capacity to engage the low core, your feet are going to float off of the floor. You don't have to pick them up. You certainly don't have to kick them. They're going to float right up there. Okay. And so that's because the hips finally come in alignment over the shoulders. And when we align the spine into that position, the body responds. Okay. That's not to say you don't have to do the foundational work. You've also got to be pretty strong in your body, to consider approaching this work. But the practice of yoga asana alone will give you that strength. And I know that a lot of people who lift weights and do all of these things, right? But that's where it's a little bit like calisthenics, is that The practice of yoga all by itself will give you that. I don't lift a single weight. I don't use a single tool or thing, and I know we talked about that too. Todd really wants me to do some more strength training, and I'm probably going to pay attention to. But for the meantime, it's like what I've seen, what I've lived, what I've experienced in my body is like I told you, when I first came to yoga, I had never done any physical activity at all. And it gave me this. So that's where I think that there's a little bit of misconception around yoga, that you must be already flexible, or that you must be already athletic, or that you must be already something. It's not true. Yoga is for everybody in every moment.
I agree. And thanks for reminding me about doing headstands, because I had stopped for a while because of my shoulder injury, because it is so heavy on the shoulders. And like, now I'm training back to do handstand push-ups again, because at my peak, I could do seven reps for handstand push-ups. So I'm actually starting back from the beginning. And today I was able to get 1 rep in. So, basically I'm going back to the foundation. So the shoulders are actually feeling a lot better. So I definitely will be doing that headstands again, because I found them.
Leg lift, remember?
Yes, leg lifts. Yes. So I'm definitely going to start those back. And those rip up the core. Like when you're finished, your abs are on fire. Because I tell people, right, like the idea is not to be doing loads and loads of ab exercises. You do exercises that work your core. And when you do something like the headstand, oh my goodness, your abs are on fire afterwards. Because basically much that's what keeps you in alignment is the actual core. Right?
Like I said,
both, and the shoulders as well.
And just like your body's own natural, intelligent design, that when you align it appropriately, it's not even, you're not having to do anything besides simply stay there, And so the real key is the consistent, okay, right? Here we're coming back to tapas, to the discipline of it. Yoga, okay. Sutra 114, this is what I want to say right now. Sutra 114 says the practice becomes firmly grounded when well attended to for a long time without break and in all earnestness, okay? So it leaves no room for doubt. This happens when you tend to it, when you are dedicated to it, when you are committed to it, okay? And one of the things that is super important, like you're saying about the core, in the commitment to any inversion, is the ab work, but it doesn't have to be this, like you said, this like wild, like super intense thing. I do 6 minutes of abs every day. I have a 6-minute ab sequence. So, and I share this with everybody all the time, right? And it's mostly focused on the transverse abdominis, like this low part of the core that we're very rarely engaging, most of us, especially in traditional abdominal exercises, all right? So it's focused on this low core. And what this also does for us at the same time is releases and heals like many of the problems that people experience in the lumbar spine, because we know that muscles function in pairs, right? And so when we engage the muscles of the transverse abdominis, we release the muscles of the low back area. And in turn, when we release the ones of the abdomen, we engage the ones in the back. And so the core work, you don't just need to be strong in your abdominals to do a handstand. The whole core of your body that we know is like this corset, right? This is what really has to have the ability to not do much besides engage and stay that way, right? So that's why it's kind of a lie that your handstand is about your core or just about your shoulders or just, it's a full body activation, okay?
True.
And the way to get to it is through that consistent, dedicated practice. I'm sorry, there's not another answer. There's no shortcut to your handstand. There's no, you're not going to get it if you don't do it, if you don't do the work to do it. You've got to have the tapas, right? Which is what we call it in yoga, the discipline.
True, because you have to flex your legs as well, point your toes, you know what I mean? It's a complete total body engagement. So yeah, I concur. So I misspoke when I said it was only abs, but in reality, it's the entire body.
Sorry, it's a little bit of a soapbox of mine.
Yes, but to be fair, it's true because I'm always like extremely tired after because it works the entire body, right? And people would just look at you like, what's wrong with you? You're just standing on your hands. And it was like, nah, man, this is intense, bro. You know?
That it's true that we can't spot train the body, and less so in a posture that asks us to reverse the ordinary functions of the body, right?
Yeah.
Legs are bigger and stronger and more muscular, and the bones are thicker and denser in the legs than they are in the arms. And that's because the legs are what carry us around walking in this world usually. It doesn't mean the arms can't do it. It just, they need to be, developed and worked with in a specific way. And so handstand is, like you said, training absolutely every muscle of your body. It's working with the whole vessel.
True. So Ashley, last question. So if people wanted to go to India, what could they expect in terms of like yoga stuff? And if someone is interested in taking that journey, what are some of the things you can share? Because obviously it's a cultural shift. So what are some of the little insights you could give to people that if they wanted to do that, what to expect and how to best have a good experience there in their learning and stuff like that?
Well, obviously, I have to admit that I have total bias, like I said, and I feel like, okay, let me back up a little bit. India is a massive country, okay? And I have been only to the south of it because that is where my teachers are. So I can speak a little bit to that, to Mysuru and Melkote specifically, right? Are the places that I have been in India. But other places like Goa or Bangladesh, right, are different entirely. And so it's really going to depend on what you're looking for and what lineage of yoga you find yourself following. If yoga is the reason that you want to go to India. But for me, I obviously would tell you to go to Mysore and to Melkote and to study with my teachers. I mean, because you heard me in the beginning explain who Sri Bns Iyengar is. He's the last living student of Krishnamacharya, daily sharing this practice still, and like he's been this incredible inspiration for me in that when we were there, he said to us, I teach the asana every day. I teach it every day if one person or if 100 people come, because I know that whoever finds me sincerely seeking, I am meant to share yoga with them, right? And that's the same philosophy that I have about like when people come to me to work with me. It's like whoever comes to me sincerely seeking, I know that it is my dharma as well to share that with them, So if I'm going to send people anywhere in India, it's going to be to the source of that thing that inspired it in me. And the great thing is that because my teacher, Andrew Epler, has studied with Guruji for so long, he made a documentary called Mysore Yoga Traditions, which I definitely invite everyone to view as well. And from that sparked the Mysore Yoga Conference, which is an annual yoga conference then where you can go to Mysore and Melkote and meet these people that I've been talking about this whole time, Guruji and Dr. Rao and the scholars. There's so many of them. I don't want to start to name names because I'll leave somebody out inadvertently. So I'll just call them the scholars of the Samskriti Foundation. And so, of course, I recommend that experience. And you will find that, yes, like, you and I live in Mexico at this point, right? But in different parts of Mexico still. So this speaks to what I'm talking about India. Your experience in where you're at is totally distinct from mine, geographically, culturally, everything. But in the south of India, there is, in these bigger cities, there's less of it, this like abject poverty, right? But you still definitely are going to encounter things that as I don't know where all your listeners are from, but people from first world countries, for example, are going to be really unaccustomed to seeing. The cows walk through the streets because they're sacred animals, right? I have videos of a cow eating this pile of coconuts in the streets, and the traffic will stop for them, right? And in Mysore, there are monkeys everywhere, and they look really cute, but they're not that sweet, and they'll like mess with you. They'll steal your stuff, and they're like, you got to be a little wary of the monkeys. And then like you eat with your hands. There's no silverware, right? Like we ate off of like palm leaves, but we were also eating, to be fair, we were eating prasad, temple food, like the food prepared for the temples, for the offerings, because we were staying with these Brahmin priests and studying with them, And so you eat only with your hands, and there were processions through the streets, like of these every day. They're celebrating some deity, some important moment or festival or whatever, or just the day-to-day prayers. Like tapas is something very real in this whole culture. There's real dedication to this. Nobody is like letting it slide. Maybe the younger generations now are getting kind of farther away from this, but like in this place Malkote, which is this tiny town in India, you really saw people living this like ultra traditional life, very disconnected from like kind of modern society. Like we went and practiced in an ancient temple there that's just at the center of their town. And so that's what their life centers around, right? And it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see. And you're gonna come into contact with things that shock you. For example, like I did this serpent tattoo while I was there because the serpent has a lot of meanings for me. But with the Kundalini and with plant medicines and with a lot of different things, consciousness and energy. But while I was there, they told us the story about the king cobra. Okay, so there's the big snakes that okay. So these snakes are so venomous that there's no antidote, right? Like if you get bit by one, that's it. You're dead in 15 to 20 minutes tops. And that's it. There's
Wow.
Right. And they're everywhere, honestly, because human beings encroached on their habitats, right? And so it's not their fault. It's ours. But so it's like, I think that they told us like something like 40,000 people, don't quote me on this, I'm not totally, but I think he said like something like 40,000 people a year die of these snake bites, right? And he said though, that it's the perspective that the people have about it is not even that something bad has happened, okay? It's just that because they know that this snake is so venomous and it has no antidote and that we're the ones like kind of living on its turf, that it's like the belief around it is that if this snake bites you, it simply was your time. Like that was it. That was the end of this journey in this vessel for you. So there's nothing to lament. There's nothing to mourn or to be upset about or to blame the snake for. It actually is just like that was the moment that it was necessary for you to transition from this body into your next experience.
Wow. That is levels. So they're just everywhere.
I mean, you run into one walking down the street or whatever. In fact, I did not see one in the whole time I was there, even though we did go out into very remote areas.
Okay.
But I think it's like there are also snakes in the United States that are very venomous.
True.
So I think like more so it speaks to the way that we think of like, at least in my living of it, right? Like my uncle had a ranch and there were rattlesnakes all over his ranch in New Mexico and he would kill them, every time he found one, And then I was like, I don't know, I was a kid, but it's like, what a difference in perspective. This is something I have to get rid of because it could harm me versus this is a divine being in and of itself. And if it bites you, it's simply because there was no other way it could have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very interesting take. And to be fair, ancient cultures and cultures of antiquity didn't see death as something bad. They just saw it as like, okay, it's your time to go. And it's like, see you, Todd, I'm going away. And when you're ready to come and chat me, I'll be upstairs, something like that,
Because that's very much the vision of it in yoga. And that's very apparent, in the culture there, this huge difference between like, in Christian culture where many people believe that this is one body, one shot, one time. And after this is like, there's a heaven or hell scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas in Eastern religions and cultures, there's this belief that this is one of a set of go-rounds, right? To come into a body as many times as it needs to, right? So there's, again, less of this like belief that death is something so terrible or awful or final, even, because in the end, we're immortal beings. This body is mortal. This body is temporary. But what we are, like we've been talking about, was never born and can never die.
True. True. Very, very true.
So
So,
I think the big difference is running into that kind of mindset worldview.
okay, thanks for sharing that because I am certain that some people will probably think, well, you know what, I would want to go to India. So I just wanted to, so that they would understand what to prepare for, what to expect, and just eating with your hands is a cultural difference that we have massively here. So,
Oh, actually can only eat with one hand. I forget. I don't want to say this wrong because this is a really important one, but there's one hand that's for the bathroom and one hand that's for food. And you
I think
really
your
need,
right hand is for food and your left hand is for bathroom.
yeah, I think so. I just didn't suddenly in my mind, I was like, I don't want to mix that up. That one's really, really big. But yeah, so you can only like have contact with other people as well with this hand that you eat with, because obviously you're not going to use your bathroom hand. And the reason that that's actually super important and that people should know about maybe too, is that like toilet paper is a very Western thing, or well, I don't know. Maybe it's used. I can't speak to all parts of the world. I haven't been there, but they use the bidets, the spray. Like they have these little right that you like especially in rural or remote areas. Like there's a real reason that people are not using the bathroom hand to be in contact with someone else. So.
Wow. Okay. It's true because I went to Thailand and what you're saying is true. Like you see like these hoses in the toilet. And at first I was like, what? But then I was like, okay, that's why,
And I will say another thing regarding hygiene, right? Regarding bathrooms, is that there are not showers, right? Like, or at least again, where I was, you bathe out of a bucket. Okay. Like there's a spigot on the wall. I was in fancy places then, right? Like, in some way, because they all had like their own bedroom and bathroom. We actually stayed in this really cool, it's called Chitravana. It's this like jungle, these like huts in the jungle that have this other big, beautiful practice space and a pool. So it's actually like a very nice place, right? But even so, like the accommodations are shockingly different than what we would consider, normal here, because I had my own bedroom and my own bathroom on this retreat, right? But the bathroom was a spigot on the wall with a bucket.
Wow.
And like a toilet in the room and a sink. You know what I mean? And so from actually that I had already become a little bit desensitized to that. And I had a particular living situation with a landlord who didn't get my hot water fixed for a long time. So I'd actually learned to do this like heating water and bathing myself in this way before I went to India. Don't worry, I survived it, obviously. And actually, I realized the beautiful synchronicity of it, that in the end, there's my baby kidding. In the end, that experience of the landlord who didn't fix my hot water prepared me totally for India, because otherwise I would not have known what to do with the bucket. I would have walked into the bathroom like...
Yeah. I asked because, when you live in Mexico, you realize that there's certain difference in customs. So I just thought to prepare people if they're inspired to go to India, then you know what to expect, because when you know what to expect, then you're not disappointed, right? So it's all about managing expectations.
If you're going to India as a spiritual seeker, you can't be disappointed, and that was the thing. People ask me all the time where I was from, and I started to be a little bit like, not annoyed about it, but maybe like a little bit shy, because everybody was just like, oh, where have you come from? Where have you come from? And finally a friend explained to me like, oh, no, it's not probably what you think it is at all. What they're saying is like, how far have you traveled to make this pilgrimage? They want to know about like your experience of your dedication and your commitment and your faith and your belief and your, and like what draws you there. Because obviously to cross the world, like to go to India is to cross the world.
Pretty much, yeah. Like 16 hours from this side of the world as well. Something like that.
Right. So it is to go to Europe as well. But if you go to, you know what I mean? Like, or to Asia in general. But like, if you go to India as a spiritual seeker, I don't think that you could become disappointed, to be totally honest.
Okay, cool. So Ashley, it was absolutely fantastic talking to you tonight. So if people would like to learn about yoga, work with you, get in contact with you, please tell the people where they can find you and what they can expect if they work with you and stuff like that.
Thanks, Todd. It's been a complete pleasure and a privilege, honestly, to be here with you. And we always have the most incredible conversations. So I knew that we would be able to share something really great with folks today. And I'm super grateful for the opportunity. And in terms of where to find me, I guess the easiest place is probably on Instagram, right? I'm Ashley_Yogini, right? And so, like you said, it's pretty self-explanatory. And my work is in what we've been talking about, right? Of course, I can share asana classes with people, and I do here. I teach a physical yoga class just one time a week to a group of people who's really fascinated with Ashtanga right now, and that's got me super jazzed, super excited. I love a group of Ashtangis, right? But my regular work, or not regular, I mean, all of it falls under the scope. Is, like I said, with the 8 limbs, with the mentorship, with living yoga, with learning how to integrate it as these daily practices that begin as these micro transformations that over time become macro. And you recognize through the practice of yoga your ability to create your own reality. And you recognize your ability to do these things that we've been talking about, to shift these negative thoughts, to become more radiant, more vital, more connected, more in every aspect of your life, on and off the mat. Like one of my big catchphrases right now is this, take your balance off the mat and into your life. That's what I help people do, is learn what yoga is on this level and how to engage it as a daily living practice that helps you create your own reality. So if people are interested in yoga in that way, I am most happy to receive them and share. And if people are interested in, just like I did with you, if people are interested in asana or interested in handstands, I also have infinite resources and knowledge to share there. More than happy to do that. Or Kundalini as well. Kundalini is another one that people have had really beautiful experiences studying Kundalini with me and then gone on to, to really develop that path out for themselves. And as everybody does with anything, like that's the beautiful thing, is I don't even have to take credit. I can't really take credit for what yoga does in people's lives when they come to and learn it with me, because it's the yoga. It's yoga doing what it does, and the seed being planted and, blossoming in your life and transforming it. So that's what my work with yoga is. And I would love to receive any of your listeners who were fascinated or interested or called by our conversation today. So please do come and see me at Ashley Yogini.
Yes, people, and she's a great teacher. As you can tell, she basically talks a lot like me, just from a yoga perspective. So you're in good hands with her. And if you're into the how do you pronounce Ashkatanga, right? If you're into the
it means 8.
Ashkatanga, right?
Almost close enough. Ashtanga.
Ashtanga. Okay, Ashtanga. So if you're interested in that, and also, learning your handstands, Ashley is awesome, because she helped me to correct my line a lot. And now that the shoulder's getting better, I'm going to start about doing headstands and, start about doing some exercises to give me that, because she's awesome.
Do you remember the one where you sit down with the hands on the either side of the knees and lift the hips so that you land on the feet with the legs extended, and then you try to control your way down as much as you can? That's another one to help you right now.
Yes. So as you can see, she's giving me tips already, and she's awesome. So go and show her some love, give her some support, hit her up, tell her you saw her on the Conscious Man 7. And you won't be disappointed, because she's a great, great teacher, and she's full of knowledge, as you can tell. And she and I talk basically the same thing, just from different perspective. And this is what we need to have. We have to have a diverse view of things, because it helps us to get that closer to the truth and to the great spirit that's inside of us. So as you know, folks, I am an online physical trainer. So if you want to burn fat and build muscle, and you want to get into the best shape of your life and improve your mindset and improve in other areas of your life, because as from talking to her, getting the physical body moving is part of yoga. I may not call it yoga, but it's the same thing. Hit me up on my Instagram at Adriana_246, or my name, Todd Cave. And if you want to get a cool shirt like this, which is called Truth Isn't Learned, Truth is Realized. You can get it from my store on Amazon. Links will be in the description of this podcast. And as you know, I help people to connect with magic mushrooms. So if you want to help, if you want some help overcoming some fears and traumas, or you want to start a spiritual journey, hit me up as well. And if you like more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. And that is all, folks. Remember, at Adriano_246, or my name, Todd Cave. Hit up Ashley _Yogini, and tell her that Todd sent you. And that would be another great episode, folks. And much love to you all. And thank you for listening. And stay tuned, because we have some more amazing and great guests like Ashley to come on the Conscious Man 7. Speak to you soon. Ciao and namaste.